Thanksgiving. As we said earlier, our topic, Are You Ready for Christmas?, is really a topic that's going to be the beginning of a series that both Robin is going to be preaching upstairs and Kenny through here. I will warn you, you still have time to go up and hear Robin do it more professionally. As we heard just a minute ago, starting in January, will be the new lay leader. Robin just asked me a couple of weeks ago if I would take on that task. I don't know if Robin's ever asked you to do anything, but he can be pretty crafty in terms of how he does that. What he did first, knowing I'm pretty busy, is he sent me an email. And he said, not because we didn't want to talk live, but because he wanted me to have an opportunity for prayerful reflection before we talked. I think that's good because my first reaction would have been, Robin, I'm honored, but I just don't have time. But after prayerful reflection, I kept hearing, Tim, you have as much time as anybody else. God gives us all the same amount of time. Nobody gets more, no one gets less. But what we get to do ourselves uniquely is to prioritize our time. So as I prayerfully reflected, it was hard for me to tell God I don't have priority to do what Robin asked. So I started looking for another excuse, I'll be candid. What I consulted was the Book of Discipline to say what really are the qualifications. Maybe I'm just not qualified to do this. And when I looked at it, it was pretty straightforward. The Book of Discipline outlines 5 actions for the lay leader. The first is to represent the laity. That seemed pretty obvious, and I felt like after 20 years of membership here, I feel like I know this church pretty well. But it also was to foster action. And I do think that it's a time for our church to be unified in doing, not just being. Next, we're to meet regularly with the pastors. As many of you know, I'm a preacher's kid, so I think it's important that we do minister to our ministers. I know firsthand how difficult and challenging that job could be, and I do think that's something that I can offer. Next was pretty obvious. You know us Methodists, we love to meet. I think we have more committee meetings than anything else. And that is, quite candidly, something Robin and I talked about. How do we tie these together and meet no more than necessary to do God's work? Next was a commitment to connect personal spiritual growth with expanding the local church. And here, quite candidly, in my busy life, I actually look forward to that accountability. Because I can assure you, standing up here and talking as I'm doing today will really make you read the scripture a little bit harder, as we'll talk about later. And finally, to promote lay speaking. Now, I'd envision promoting more to you do the lay speaking than me, but we will start here today. But I did humbly accept Robin's challenge. And I then want to ask each of you, I think one of the great things about this contemporary service is it brings new people and younger people into the leadership of this church. And I think it's very important for us to take action in our community, in our time today. And regardless of your age, tenure with the church, station, I want to challenge you that if you feel passionate about doing something, let me help you through this church turn that into action. My only request was that you stay personally committed to what you're passionate about. Well, with that, let us turn to the beginning of this series, Are You Ready for Christmas? And let me really ask a question. Is Thanksgiving really the pregame show for Christmas? Many of you may have heard me say many times, Thanksgiving is my personal favorite holiday. As I reflected on that for this talk today, I thought, should I feel guilty about saying that? Is Thanksgiving really even a Christian holiday, or is it secular? Well, certainly it's traditionally American. I think it's very much in keeping with In God We Trust and our commitment to build a country, one nation under God. And because of that, I personally believe that it is Christian. And I believe that it does lay the foundation for Christmas. I think it's particularly important for us in our modern society to think about another uniquely American tradition, which is the commercialization of Christmas. We in marketing have not figured out yet how to make a pilgrim seem sexy or inviting or too commercial, but we're trying. Have you noticed Target? Target fulfilled their commitment not to be open on Thanksgiving. So they opened at 12:01 the next day. You may have seen 50,000 people who were employees of Target protested, saying, we have to come in 2 hours early. You're impinging on hours. Could you push it back to 2? And they said, no, we can't give up that 2 hours of revenue. I went up to Fresh Market just before Thanksgiving, getting a few last-minute things. And I noticed that there was an encampment in that Gun Barrel Road location. I asked someone, is this part of Occupy Wall Street or Occupy something else? They said no, they just got here for the 2 days early to beat the rush of Black Friday at the Best Buy store. You think about that, you get that discount on that television or whatever they're offering as their doorbuster. They're going to risk life and limb to be there right when the door opens. And they're going to have camped out in the cold for 2 days to be able to do that, neglecting time with family or reflection. I think that does say that we have to think about Thanksgiving Thursday in competition with Black Friday and the whole commercialization of Christmas. I do think, though, that what we're talking about really does give us opportunity to think, what are we thankful for? As I prepared for this, or started thinking about this, many of you know I work at Shaw, and many times we'll go home taking that Glenwood drive. And what I saw was there's a small Baptist church there that always puts these little pithy sayings to try to attract visitors. And we saw this saying a couple of weeks ago that said, what if God took tomorrow everything you did not thank him for today? I'll be candid, that's not part of my theology. My God is not a taking God. My God is not really a wrathful God, but a giving, gracious God. Thank God for that. But it certainly gave me pause for thought. And I would ask you to think about that for just a second. What if God took everything you didn't thank him for today? Within that, I would ask you to think now about what you just thought of personally. Well, the first things you thought about relationships or things. Were they the people in your life that are important to you? Were they the institutions such as this church, this very worship service, the connection through small groups? Or was it your home, your car, your status, your position? Each of us, I think, have to answer that individually. And to think about specifically this church, this service, this group, somewhat like air. I think it's very easy to take it for granted when it's plentiful. But if you're held underwater, you think about it a lot. If something's taken away, you think about it a lot. But as I prepared for this and talked with Kenny about this, I don't think it was any of these kind of superficial, secular things that were his beginning to this series at all. He challenged me to look at our biblical lesson for the day, which is the story of the conversion of Lydia, which is in Acts 16, 13 through 15. And he talked to me as if simply mentioning that passage to me should have great significance as it would relate to Christmas. And I don't know about you, but it didn't jump right off the page to me. So I had to consult many areas. Thank goodness for the internet. The first thing I thought about was the fact that he chose Acts to start this off as opposed to Luke, its companion journal. Certainly in Luke talks about the birth story and beginning of Christmas and the reason for the season, if you will. But the book of Acts is really about action. actions and the beginnings of the local church, how the church should react to the teachings of Christ, recognizing that in the book of Luke, he always emphasized that prayer always precedes action, that reflection and thought, alignment with God precedes activity. But make no mistake, the book of Acts is a book of action, not reflection. So let's think a little bit more about the conversion of Lydia. Lydia was a prominent businesswoman. Now, the New Testament talks about many, many women who were very important to our tradition in the ministry of Jesus. But most were not prominent businesswomen because prominent businesswomen were quite rare during this time. Lydia is mentioned twice in the scriptures. The first is what we're talking about here, to the conversion. In fact, she was given credit to be the first convert in Europe, the first person in Europe to take up the risk of following Christ. And then later, because of her prominence and because of her conviction and because of her ability, she provided for Paul and Silas where they were imprisoned by the Romans in Philippi. And for those of you who are not familiar, prisons in that time were really not like prisons here. If you were found that you were going to be incarcerated, unless you could pay your own way, you were killed. But because she was able to provide for them, Paul was able to extend his ministry. Well, with that little bit of background, let's look at our passage, Acts 16, 13 through 15. I'll read. And on the Sabbath day, we went out of the city to the riverside where prayer was customarily made. And we sat down and spoke to the women who met there. Now a certain woman named Lydia heard us. She was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira who worshiped God. The Lord opened her heart to heed the things spoken by God. And when she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. So she persuaded us. Boy, is this the testament to the density of the Bible. In those 3 verses, quite candidly, if I was reading this on my own, not having to prepare to use this to stand here in front of you, I would have glanced right through it. I'm not sure that on first reading really says, boy, that gets me ready for Christmas. But let's think about all good stories as a setup and a punchline. Well, what's the setup to this story? Let's look deeper. The setup for this story was this. And on the Sabbath day, we went out of the city to the riverside where prayer was customarily made, and we sat down and spoke to the women who met there. Now a certain woman named Lydia heard us. She was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira who worshiped God. Now that setup would have had great relevance to Luke's audience, but perhaps not much relevance to me. The first thing that we would have seen in this setup is when they said the city. What they were talking about to the city, to that group, they would obviously know it was Philippi, because that was the largest city in Mesopotamia, which is really pushing up into Europe. The city that Lydia was from at the time, the Thyatira, was an ancient city in Turkey, but she had moved up into Europe because of her prominence. The fact that he mentioned that the women prayed at the river, what that means is, keep in mind, the Romans were not particularly comfortable with early Christianity. And this was before Rome adopted Christianity as an official language.